It seems American politics are in transition now. Donald Trump has seized a huge swath of power over the federal bureaucracy and wants more. But this is a long time coming. Over the past century, Congress and the Supreme Court have surrendered more and more power to the executive. While people are calling Trump a dictator, he hasn't tapped into the true power of the presidency yet. But if you wanted to become an actual dictator of America, what would you have to do? What steps could you take? This isn't such a bizarre scenario, by the way. Every new president gets briefed on exactly how to do this in response to a national crisis. The orders he could sign, called the Presidential Emergency Action Documents, would spell nothing less than the death of American democracy and the beginning of a new era of dictatorship. This is What, Why, How, and that's what the video is about. If you like this sort of thing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out patreon.com/whatwhyhow for early access to future videos. Okay, let's assume you're not a regular person. Well, that's probably not too much of a stretch for my fans. What I mean is, let's assume you're someone with some noteworthy status. A businessman, a minor celebrity, a third-tier politician. You're going to want to leverage whatever you can to get into public office. While in some countries there might be a barracks-to-dictator pipeline, that's not the case in America, where the military is strictly and staunchly apolitical, at least when it comes to domestic politics. So unfortunately, your route to the White House will be through the ballot box. So let's talk about your political career. It's of course beneficial to start in a state that's not too competitive, but also has enough donors to fill your campaign war chest. That means Texas for right-wingers, and New York or California for left-wingers, maybe Delaware. Like any politician, you're going to want to work your way up the ladder to becoming either governor or senator. It's also helpful to become the leader of some political cause that fills an unsupplied demand in national politics. Viktor Orban, for example, was vaulted onto the national stage as a champion of liberalism in the dying years of communism in Hungary. Erdogan embraced Turkey's Islamists and nationalists, while Hugo Chavez took on a left-wing populist platform during an economic downturn in Venezuela. So if you're on the right side of the aisle, you have an obvious path to follow. That's Donald Trump.
The problem with Ron DeSanctimonious is that he needs a personality transplant, and those are not yet available.
But even more hardline on immigration. If you're on the left side of the aisle, I think there's a major demand in US politics for someone who has the policies of Bernie Sanders, but isn't afraid to call Republicans slurs. If you watch my videos, you can probably tell which one I'm leaning towards, but that's not the point of the video. Also, you're going to want a threat. By that I mean you're going to want a scapegoat for all the national problems, a danger that, if you're right about, should terrify all Americans. George Bush had the threat of terrorism, McCarthy had the threat of communist infiltration, Trump has the immigrants and the deep state. You just need to pick something. Preferably it's a juicy one, something that really resonates with people. Everything you do will be to save Americans from the threat. As Trump said, in the end, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I'm just standing in the way. Since you're going to be crusading against the existing political order, you're going to want to take a populist angle with your political agenda. You'll be a man of the people, a crusader for common sense against the geriatric, sclerotic bureaucracy which is infiltrated by traitors, not loyal to America, but the threat. But of course you also need allies. While you might be tempted, you cannot survive outside the Democratic or the Republican parties in American politics. There are just too many bureaucratic obstacles otherwise. Plus, if you capture one of the parties like Trump or FDR, you'll have a huge advantage. So let's fast forward a bit. Through your populist messaging and strategic publicity stunts like insulting your favorite scapegoats and flattering low IQ podcasters,
we know what politicians are cheating us so that we don't have them in anymore.
All right. You're a smart guy.
You establish yourself as someone with a national brand. And it'll definitely help, by the way, if there's some sort of major national desperation, either an economic recession or a significant quantity of political violence. Lucky for you and unlucky for the rest of us, that does seem to be on the horizon for America. Anyways, when the next presidential election cycle comes, you need to run. Even if you have no chance of winning, it's a great excuse to publicize a book about your background you had ChatGPT write up.
I love ChatGPT. I love it.
And of course, you want to make additional connections with political organizers and donors across the country. Speaking of donors, you're going to need them. In 2024, for example, Trump raised hundreds of millions of dollars from billionaires like Timothy Mellon and Elon Musk, doubtlessly in exchange for various backdoor and even front porch political promises. Fundraising is how you pay for all those funny commercials, but fundraising isn't everything. As Case Meyer points out in Money in Politics, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren raised millions only to be beaten by Joe Biden by March of 2020. If you want to overthrow the status quo, you're probably going to face a concerted effort by the status quo to keep you from power. Your personal charisma and the potency of your agenda will be key to getting to the White House over these obstacles. You'll probably lose your first presidential primary, but hopefully the other side wins the presidential election, so you can blame everybody besides yourself and try again in 4 years. If you lose, but somebody else in your party wins, you can leverage your endorsement and campaign contributions to getting yourself a position in the cabinet. Let's say eventually you win a primary. Now what? Well, there are a million books about presidential elections, but something you'll want to pay attention to in particular is the street. Increasingly, street fights and protests play a major role in American politics. Not in directly shaping elections yet, but instead providing propaganda. You're going to want to marshal the street as best you can, schedule protests at your opponent's rallies, encourage your supporters to be tough, so on. And when inevitably one of your supporters gets shot, talk about it every day until November. And you shouldn't be afraid of other dirty tricks either. If you want to win, you should solicit leaks, you should plant bugs, spread deliberate lies and conspiracy theories, spam fake text to mislead your opponent's supporters, manufacture AI videos to flood Facebook, and if governors belonging to your party purge voter rolls right before the election, why not promise them a juicy job in DC? And hey, if your supporters intimidate people at the ballot box, or if a political ally finds himself in charge of counting the votes, you have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, right? Okay, so let's say against all odds, you claw your way into the White House. What then? On January 20th of whatever odd-numbered year, you will be sworn in by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay, I'm president. Hey, I'm president. Can you believe it, right? I don't know. I thought you needed a little bit more.
Now what? Well, let's establish something important. At this point, the United States president is above the law. In Trump v. United States, the Supreme Court itself ruled that, while the president has no immunity for unofficial acts, he does have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority, and he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. So it's not complete immunity, but practically speaking, it's a lot. And for those cases where you might get in trouble with the law anyways, you can probably just pardon yourself or bribe everyone around you with full pardons. That means the only real way to defeat a president is through elections or impeachment and removal in Congress. But removal requires 2/3 vote in the Senate. That means if you have 33 senators who believe voting you out of office would be worse than just letting you stay, you'll be fine. You'll have to get some leverage, and you can't completely break down like Richard Nixon, but the deck is already stacked in your favor. Once the moment of decision comes, it will be too late. The president can only be defeated by himself. Okay, now we've established your weaknesses, or the lack thereof, we need to talk about the multiple battles you'll be fighting at once. Oh, and fighting all at once is necessary. You need to flood the zone and overwhelm your enemies, including the slow-to-move courts. First, you gotta vassalize your party. Maybe you've already done this, but lucky for you, the president can leverage his power to remake his political party in his image. This is gonna take a while, but congressional primaries are gonna start soon. That means you should knock out a couple disloyal party members by endorsing their party opponents. It also helps if you muscle your way into controlling either the RNC or the DNC, which will have immense influence over the primaries and the entire political process. As a victorious president, this shouldn't be too hard. Once you make an example of a couple people, the remaining figures in your party should fall in line. They are politicians, after all. The second front will be the federal bureaucracy, the executive branch itself. As Ronald Reagan himself said, personnel is policy. You're going to want to staff the executive branch with loyalists. You need as many of your political appointees in positions of power as possible at the cost of career bureaucrats who might not be loyal to your ambitious agenda. Now, some parts of the executive branch are in a gray zone, partially outside the reach of the president. For example, there's the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces civil antitrust law. It's important for you to control the FTC because it gives you additional leverage against the corporate sector, which you will need to blackmail in your campaign to amass power. According to current law, the president can only remove FTC commissioners for inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance, thanks to Humphrey's Executor v. United States. Actually, that's not quite true. Since taking office, Trump has fired 2 of the FTC commissioners and has argued he has the right to do so. The Supreme Court will listen to arguments in December, but in the meantime has allowed the firings to go through. So fire them. Fire anybody who isn't loyal to your agenda. Purge the national government.
If you have to go all the way down to the janitor of the Justice Department, fire that son of a bitch. He's asked for it.
Probably the most important organ of the executive branch to flush out is the Department of Justice. First, your Attorney General has to be a loyalist. They cannot bend to Congress at all. Second, you have to drag the FBI into your camp too. This can be done by deleting the FBI Office of General Counsel, the Office of Congressional Affairs, and so on, so the FBI is required to instead rely on the Department of Justice's own loyal offices instead. This idea comes from Project 2025, by the way. Now, something to be aware of, as described in Project 2025, is that assistant United States attorneys and other line prosecutors might seek to influence outcomes of cases not because of any legal deficiency in the case or policy being defended, but by refusing to take certain positions, by writing public letters of protest, and by engaging in faux resignations from certain internal appointments. This can cause the department to take positions that are inconsistent with the interest of the president and his appointees in other places throughout the administration. If this happens, just fire them. If you want to become dictator of America, you gotta be ruthless. We'll circle back to the FBI in a minute, but keep talking about the threat. Your dangerous foes have infiltrated the government, they've hijacked the republic, and only you can save the nation. Also, being president is being a celebrity constantly under the public eye. If you want to be a dictator, you need to control your public image. Now, the White House under a typical administration tries, but often fails, to do this. But the president has many levers over the media that haven't been used much before. For one, the Federal Communications Commission has the power to approve or reject various media mergers. Companies will prioritize the financial benefit of you approving their merger over whatever restrictions on political speech you secretly and surreptitiously impose on them. They'll start marching to your tune once the music becomes clear. They're cynical, you're on the same page. The first half of your first term in office will probably rush by in a blur, especially because you'll be leaping from one national scandal to another. At this point, you're probably not even the most powerful president in US history, by the way, but the omelet isn't done yet. What separates the wheat from the chaff are elections, and the midterms are coming up. By now you should have the FBI and the federal bureaucracy in your pocket. Now, there are a couple legal ways you can manipulate the results of the midterms to make sure you don't lose Congress, like presidents usually do. One is through gerrymandering. By now you should have cultivated an alliance of cynical populists across the United States. Under your encouragement, they should launch efforts to redraw congressional districts to make sure your party wins much greater than its fair share of the vote. Sometimes states have pesky laws preventing partisan gerrymandering, so they're gonna have to get around those, or maybe just ignore them. As I mentioned earlier, it would also be helpful if political allies in state governments cleaned up voter rolls, ideally targeting people unlikely to vote for your party, if that's possible. But of course, there's nothing quite like direct tampering. And if the federal government hypothetically tried to change election results, it seems very plausible to me that it could in fact do such a thing very easily. So it goes without saying that you could probably beat the trend and win your midterm elections if you felt compelled to do so. By now the country's probably in pretty bad shape though. Your critics will doubtlessly point out your various obvious violations of the law, mobilizing nationwide protests, if not riots, against your administration. Violence will probably escalate as your side retaliates. If you're on the left side of the aisle, you can smear protesters as fascist thugs funded by Russia and Israel, and if you're on the right side of the aisle, you can smear protesters as communist Islamists funded by China and Israel. But you don't want the chaos to disappear. You want tension to escalate, and you want people to know deep down that you could end it at any time. You should send feds into protests to escalate and crack down brutally on your opponents. You should manufacture whatever evidence you can find that these are foreign-funded fifth columnists. If a couple federal buildings get blown up, well, again, you gotta crack a few eggs, don't you? You want the country, even people in the middle, to want you to end the chaos. If only you had the power. But the main obstacle to bringing peace at last, besides the threat we've been talking about, is your opposition. You should be sicking the FBI on your political opponents at this point. Politicians are crooks, so you shouldn't have difficulty finding something to smear your opponents with, but if you have difficulty, just make something up. Rather than start with the opposition's actual leaders, people like Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell or whoever, start with the opposition party's popular members, even celebrities too, anyone who might get listened to if they speak out about you. You don't want to wipe them all out just yet, but the FBI should definitely be making a new enemy's briefcase, as President Carter put it. And by the way, you have the power to invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act and secure command of states' National Guard forces. Now you want to be limited at first, just pick a couple here and there, but you can do that. Quicker than you realize, re-election is coming up. Re-election is your moment. If you win again, you'll have the justification to do anything. And you will win again because you've infiltrated the opposition party. You've taken down all their flag bearers, leaving behind only the McGoverns and the Eagletons. And it wouldn't hurt if you got some stooge on the opposite side of the aisle to run third party when it comes to the election. The key to victory in your re-election campaign is to smear your opponent as the cause of all the chaos and violence. If you want to win, you have to fabricate, manufacture, lie, whatever it takes. And it wouldn't hurt if violence continued to escalate, coincidentally against people on your side. Lucky for you, there should be millions of hopeless, brain-rotted young men across the country eager to get their names in the history books. One or two of those, and you can win re-election in a landslide. As you're sworn into your second term in office with a loyal House and Senate, your opposition will be divided and depressed. Your first action should be to pack the courts with loyal judges, especially the Supreme Court. Process should be shrugged aside for speed, so you're probably going to want to pick some federal judges with private ties to your donors and campaign, those sorts of people. Now, of course, you might ask, who cares about the law at this point? The military. The military is going to care, so you need the Supreme Court in your pocket. After that, it's time to strike. First, you have to strike yourself. An attack on the Capitol, successful enough that the fires and the crumbling building and the ambulances and plume of smoke are on everyone's iPhone for a week straight. Imagine the country right after 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. This shouldn't be too hard for the FBI or the intelligence community to organize. They definitely have experience. By the time anybody looks into it, it'll be too late anyways. So, you need to declare a national emergency, and from there you can open up the menu to end American democracy. Lucky for you, the executive branch has been drafting up this menu for 80 years. There are already a bunch of executive orders drafted up called the Presidential Emergency Action Documents. Now these have yet to be leaked to the public, but you should probably make some edits anyways before you take the final steps. First is the censorship of all communication across the United States, including internet communication. This is a bit hard to justify legally speaking, but who's going to stop you? Through the media, the internet, everything, you can communicate what you want, your message. Second is the imposition of nationwide martial law. There is plenty of precedent on a local or even a statewide scale, but nationwide martial law has of course never been imposed, and there are a bunch of pesky legal limitations, which you'll just have to plow right through. By now, you should have reached a critical mass of political power. Third is the purge, the incarceration of any and all subversives. Lucky for you, we actually have gigantic lists of people belonging to the opposition party. People sign up for them. You can start with those, but I'm sure the NSA has all sorts of easy-to-use tools to classify any individual's political hostility to your regime based on their social media profiles. Now, of course, it's a bit hard to lock up dozens of millions of people, so you should simply impose surveillance on those and crack down on their leaders, their organizers, people of note. Lock them up. There's no need to bring them before a judge, and you can send the most dangerous of them off to Gitmo or something. Now, this will probably spark a civil war. At least 40% of the country will hate your guts, and of those, plenty will have guns. States might even attempt to secede from the Union. This is the excuse you need. The US military is probably pretty worried about you, but an actual attempted rebellion will make your opposition seem much worse. You now should have the US Armed Forces fully in your camp, and with that, nothing can challenge you besides guerrillas and urban rioters. Americans haven't really been tested in this sort of scenario. Maybe we'll all lose steam eventually, maybe Americans consume politics like TV drama, and eventually we gotta turn off the TV and go to work. On the other hand, you've proven that politics really does matter, that it's not just Twitter beefs and awkward podcasts, and that the Constitution itself requires Americans work to protect it. The question, of course, becomes, how long before it's your turn on the chopping block? But what do you think? Is something like this ever possible in America? What did I miss? Comment below to let me know. Don't forget to subscribe and check out patreon.com/whatwhyhow for early access to future videos. Thanks for those who already support the channel, which are on the screen now. Thanks, and adios.